Welcome to Tales from the Fandom, a podcast that brings a special guest out of the multiverse and straight to you. And now your host, David Ginsburg.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the latest episode of Tales from the Fandom. Today, I'm joined by a guest who I've had waiting in the wings for a while, and I'm excited to finally sit down and talk with him about one of my fandoms that rarely gets brought up, but whenever it does, I have a great time talking about it. And I am joined today with Tyler Riley. How are you doing today, Tyler?
Doing very well. Thank you so much for having me on. Yes, it's been a journey to get to this point, but here we are, and I'm really excited.
It is my pleasure. I believe a mutual friend of ours recommended you to be on the podcast. I think it is Jeff Richardson.
Yeah, Jeff Richardson.
Yes, and I was so excited to have people actually get recommended to the podcast, because normally I'm the one going out hunting for people and, please come on my podcast. And it's nice to have somebody be like, hey, this person would be good for your podcast. And I love when that happens.
Yeah, I'm really excited. I was on Jeff's podcast, Everything is Awesome podcast, to talk about the Black Lives Matter movement. But it's really nice to be on a podcast as a guest where I don't have to talk about that.
Absolutely. It's definitely something where I understand from my big white self that topic and discussion can definitely be a heavy one, and totally support Black Lives Matter and everything that's going on with the protests. And I'm not going to get into it because, again, you're not here for that. But I totally understand going from one topic that's super heavy to one topic where you don't need to have that emotional, carrying the water, so to speak.
Yeah, definitely.
But I'm excited to have you. And like I said, we're talking about a fandom that I have probably only talked about on the podcast 2 times in the 4.5 years that I've done this. And it always goes back to the era that we are going to talk about. And we're talking about professional wrestling, and specifically, mostly, the Attitude Era of what is now known as the WWE. Back then it was the WWF, before the Pandas body slammed them into submission. How did you first get into wrestling?
I first got into wrestling through my childhood best friend and his father, both named Doug Bernard Jr. and Sr. They just happened to have it on one night when I was sleeping over or something. I think it was February of the year 2000. I was 9 years old, and I remember it because it was just about a month or so prior to WrestleMania of that year. It was just after Mick Foley had quote unquote retired, after that brutal Hell in a Cell match with Triple H at No Way Out 2000. Because when I first started watching, I had no idea who Mick Foley was, and I had no idea who Stone Cold Steve Austin was, because they were both. Austin was out nursing an injury after a surgery, and Mick had retired, essentially. So I started watching from there and was hooked when I sat and watched a promo by my favorite wrestler, and arguably first celebrity crush, Triple H. I like a man with long hair and a schnoz. What can I say?
He definitely has, or at least had back then, both of them. I know now he definitely rocks he rocks the clean shave, not the clean shaven, but the close, as close as you can get to before you go bald look.
Yes.
You definitely entered at such a transitional period, though, because I'm thinking back, because I've been in wrestling way long. I'm old, so way long. But I'm thinking back to when I graduated high school in '97 is when the NWO started up, and the WCW, WWF, real rivalry was happening. And then even into that time period when you started watching, especially with Austin being out, with Mick Foley being retired, so to speak, you're coming in at a time where some of their top stars weren't really there doing what they were known for doing.
Yeah, I mean, The Undertaker wasn't even around at that point. Like, he came back in June at the King of the Ring of that year, but also, like, I had no concept of who he was. Like, the top guys really were like The Rock, Triple H, Jericho was on the rise, Big Show, and like that was like those were like the big names, I think, that have, you know, even if you don't have any knowledge of professional wrestling, you've probably heard those names at least. Definitely The Rock. The Big Show, maybe not so much. Though he does have that new Netflix following.
I saw that that pop up, and I was like, "What is this?
Mistake.
Why are you on my Netflix?"
They tried really hard. God, you know, bless them.
So you got hooked into WWE thanks to one Triple H back in the day.
Yes.
Oh my gosh. What made you stay? But like, I mean, you got hooked by Triple H, but what made you keep watching?
Honestly, it was the storytelling. I had never in my life seen anything like that before. Like, my parents did not watch professional wrestling. I had like no knowledge of it whatsoever. Even though, funnily enough, my mother graduated from the same high school, and my her younger brother, my uncle, was in the same class as WWE referee Mike Chioda.
Oh wow.
Yeah, in Willingboro, New Jersey. So he had like a bit of a knowledge, but yeah, I got hooked through the storytelling. Nowadays, I go back on the WWE network and I look at some of those old episodes, and I'm just like, I sat there for a 20-minute Triple H promo and was enthralled. I do not have the patience for that today. But at 9 years old, sitting right in front of the TV, not missing a word. And he used to have some long promos.
It is something. Because I haven't watched any of the Attitude stuff except for whenever they have like the documentaries that come out, like the Monday Night War documentaries or
Yeah,
the Attitude Era documentaries, and you know, it condenses a lot of the stuff and it makes a lot of the stuff real like easy to digest. But I remember watching in college, and it'd be every Monday night, and some of the times we'd be flipping back and forth on the TV to just see what's going on both of the channels that back then.
Yeah.
But it is something where that first almost 15 or 20 minutes of WWE was promo. Like, to kick off the show, here comes somebody to talk for an extended amount of time. And it's still something that I think they do even currently, is like the first half hour is a promo and maybe like a start of a match or something. But I mean, I think the one thing I loved about the Attitude Era versus, say, like now, and even probably like the last 10 years or so, is I loved that they were really given their opportunity to make something of themselves instead of having to go off of a script or have the writers write the majority of it. Like, they just
Right.
could do and say pretty much whatever they wanted. Like, they had like, okay, you got to talk about X, Y, and Z, but figure out how you're going to get there. And that was always the wonderful thing to watch, was just seeing them develop their characters in such a way that it's them and it's natural rather than feeling forced at times.
Yeah, forced and false. Like, you can definitely tell when somebody like isn't feeling the words that are coming out of their mouth, that it's like really not in them to say things in like that particular way. Certainly the spirit of the message, but like sometimes you get like these seemingly overscripted promos from the current crop of WWE superstars. And yeah, it's just kind of like, okay, like, yeah, you have a match coming up. Yeah, you're mad. They kicked your dog, or whatever the case may be, that is leading up to this match. And you're just kind of like, okay, that's cool. But it doesn't feel authentic half the time. And the Attitude Era was really just expressing attitude. It was
Hmm.
letting people kind of figure out their characters for themselves and really let them go. And I understand why nowadays you can't really have that as much, especially listening to some of the older promos, because some things just are not going to fly today that would have flown, back 20 years ago. Good grief.
Yeah, it's hard to believe that it is 20 years ago. And I know with being a member of like different pro wrestling Facebook groups, that is definitely like something that a lot of people look back on, and they, thanks to the network, when they're watching, they're like, I can't believe I sat through 3 hours of this show for like one good match and like maybe a good promo,
Yeah.
which took all of like maybe 15 or 20 minutes, like sitting through all those hours every week just for something that may have been good.
Yeah, we literally had in the year 2000 like a good 4-week build or longer to a stink face match between Terry Runnels and the Cat. And it's just like we spent so much time on that storyline for what?
Oh my gosh. I remember. I remember bits and pieces of certain things, and like I loved Terry back in the day. I loved her as Marlena
Yeah.
when she was with Gold Dust and in that time period. But like it's just incredible some of the stuff that we watched and put like just what? It's not even wrestling.
Yep. Yeah, what a weird time for wrestling. Like evening gown matches and hardcore wrestling was at its peak in the mainstream, at
Hmm.
least. A couple, like there are several promotions that are still going, independent promotions that hardcore wrestling is like their thing, their niche. But certainly we've kind of been pretty far removed from anything as hardcore as, an ECW or even, early 2000s WWF, now E wrestling, like with Crash Holly,
Hmm.
who instituted that year, I think, the 24/7 rule. So the championship could be defended at any time, any place, as long as there was a referee.
Yep.
And it was like that kind of stuff for me as like a 9, 10-year-old was like a really good hook. For people whose attention spans were pretty short.
Yep.
Having like a title change hand, because like that's an exciting thing when someone new becomes champion of something or somebody gets their championship back. It's a moment, and it's really fun and entertaining and exciting. So the fact that that was a constant, almost every week thing was fun and engaging, and I think they tried that and are trying it with this new belt, the 24/7 championship, but it's just not the same.
Yeah, it is definitely not. And I'm looking here because I always forget, like back in that time period, that not only did you have Vince wrestling, but you had Stephanie and Shane wrestling as well. And I keep forgetting that Stephanie was actually like a world champion at some point during the Attitude Era.
Yeah, like just a few weeks into me watching wrestling, she pinned Jacqueline for the women's championship, and to this day, like, what? And like, it wasn't even done well. Um, like if it was done well and like, the heel that doesn't have any wrestling experience wins the belt, like fine, you know? But Jacqueline gets pretty much just like one DDT and is out for like 10 minutes while Stephanie McMahon is like crawling around the ring. And it's just like, this isn't even believable. Like, I know, like, wrestling is what it is, but like, you have suspension of disbelief to a point. And poor Jacqueline, who was like arguably the toughest women's wrestler that they had on the roster at that time. Because Luna Vachon was gone by that time as well.
Mm-hmm.
So, and women's wrestling in this period was really interesting because you really did have like proper women's wrestlers, and then you had like the bikini model girls.
Yep.
But there was like an interesting mix, and like they kind of kept the two separate for the most part. Like the wrestlers would wrestle the wrestlers, and then they would send the bikini girls out into like a mixed tag, or as we mentioned before, like some weird bikini or evening gown contest.
Yeah, it's definitely something like it's looking back now at that time period, you have such a almost like a roster that is super deep with like talent that's going to become the future stars of the WWE at that point.
Yeah.
And you have a lot of stuff that they're kind of trying, they're experimenting, they're seeing what sticks, what works. But then you have a lot of stuff where you just watch it and you're cringing and you're like, oh my gosh, I
Yeah.
can't believe like this was on. I can't like there are times where I had always taught like it's something I used to try and go to like the pay-per-views or the Monday Night Raws or WCW Nitros back in the day. And it's like taking your kids is definitely something where between what they're saying and what they're doing, it's not really the most kid friendly.
Yeah, a real mixed bag of things. Like if I was a parent taking my child, like I just wouldn't know, because like you just wouldn't know what you were gonna get on any given evening. Luckily for my parents, the right to censor also came in the year 2000, which was a wrestling stable of oh gosh, it was Steven Richards.
Yep. The Good Father.
Yes, formerly the Godfather, Bull Buchanan, and Val Venus.
And Ivory.
And yes, Ivory, who Ivory is arguably one of my favorite wrestlers to this day, like in my top 10 of all time. And yeah, they would just go around and just shut down anything that they deemed inappropriate. So we saw like there was a bit of doing away with some of like the evening gown matches and overly hardcore matches to appease, the television censors at the time. But like even just looking at that roster, like you knew pretty much who everybody was, even if they weren't on TV each week. Everyone from, Kai and Tai to the APA and the Hardy Boys and the Dudley Boys, like you knew who like everyone was. Everyone had such a unique and distinct character. And we kind of were losing that kind of did it. Like I couldn't name everybody on the roster or know what their thing is, like their gimmick.
Right. And yeah, that's definitely something, because I follow the WWE now to the point of I don't watch it, but I definitely keep up with like, oh, what's happening, what's going on. And I'm like, I don't know who any of these people are because I'm not watching NXT. I'm reading about it, but I don't know who the people are. I don't know who's being called up. They have such a depth of the roster because for the longest time it's only been WWE dominating North America essentially.
Yeah.
And it's like I don't know. Like I know some of the popular people. I know a few of like the people that I see on the internet interacting, but it's definitely not where when I was watching, you knew everyone on the roster and you knew like, okay, who's feuding with who or who's like allied with who. And that's one of the things I really loved is that things like Survivor Series or things of that nature where it'd finally be almost like, and this is talking from someone who watched WWF back in like the 80s, where you finally had like these storylines of, hey, this person's doing me wrong, they're doing you wrong, and let's get together and kind of like try and take them out type of situation. And like I like that kind of storytelling, and I loved that WWE was doing that with like the Attitude Era at times.
Yeah, absolutely. And we also had like very distinct music at that time as well, being created for wrestlers' entrances, where like you could like play like the first 10 seconds of a wrestler's entrance and like people could name the wrestler, people that were
Hmm.
watching. Can't really do that so much these days.
No, and even the music was so good that you would like. I remember not buying the CD, but I acquired the CD at some point of like the music from that era because it was so good that I'd want to listen to it.
Yes, I think it was, oh gosh, I can't think of the name of the CD, but there was a recording of The Rock's own original song called Pie, which is so, it's so offensive to listen to these days. Ugh.
Ugh.
It was a different time. But yeah, like I feel like we're missing like some of like the great storytelling of the Attitude Era. Certainly not everything needs to be brought back, but like certain things could be, you know, revisited. Like in 1999, like going back when I got the network, I was able to go back and watch some of these things, and I also procured VHSs and DVDs of previous pay-per-views that I had missed growing up because I had started what felt like so late at the time. There was the the Ministry of Darkness led by the
Yep.
Undertaker. You had, you know, the Who ran over Stone Cold Steve Austin storyline. You know, you had like just Stone Cold like on a variety of vehicles, just causing mayhem. Like when today, like we really miss like these backstage segments, like to like set things up and like make things make sense, and letting people just kind of like talk to each other
Hmm.
in a more conversational way to establish relationships.
Oh, definitely. Now, I know you got hooked with Triple H, but during your time during the Attitude Era, did you have like anybody that you enjoyed watching or that you know followed, supported, hated?
Was big up on D'Lo Brown, hometown hero. He's from the same hometown as me, Burlington Township, New Jersey. And he was the first, I think, um, intercontinental and European champion. He held both titles at the same time. I think later Jeff Jarrett and Kurt Angle did that. I was also high up on The Undertaker when he came back and I found out who he was. uh, he came back in June 2000 at the King of the Ring pay-per-view with the American Badass gimmick. He had done away with the Dead Man gimmick. So he came out to the ring on a motorcycle, and that was really cool, you know, as a 10-year-old. Ivory, who I mentioned before, she was like the best woman on the mic at that time. And I think she could hold her own today as well. Like nobody could touch her on the mic, I felt, as far as women on the roster at that time. And granted, women were not given as much opportunity to be on the mic back then.
Yep.
But she definitely held her own, and she was super engaging and just hilarious. As she was always a great heel. China, of course. All of DX, really, for me. I liked rooting for the villains or the heels the most part. Like I was all in on Triple H. I hated The Rock. I did not like Stone Cold when he came back because he went right after Triple H, and I was like, no, that's not okay. Go away. And I warmed up to Mick Foley after a while. Mick Foley also came back after retiring. He became this on-screen character, the commissioner of the WWE. And I warmed up to him over time because he was just so fun and sweet and personable. Like it just like really read on camera off the screen the type of person that he was, like just genuineness that just comes from Mick Foley. Test also, oh my gosh, just looking back at just watching the year 2000, which like I do every now and again, just out of nostalgia. But just going back and watching the Attitude Era now and just seeing some of the old SmackDowns and Monday Night Raws and just thinking about how many people are no longer with us, is crazy and sometimes a bit difficult to watch sometimes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's I want to get. I'll get to that in a moment because I want to go back and talk about a few of the people that you mentioned. Like, I remember when the Nation of Domination was created and D'Lo was in that group, and
Like the chest protector.
I fell in love with D'Lo because there was just something about him. I can't really say what. Like, I don't know if it was like him wearing a chest protector all the time for whatever reason, but there was definitely like this thing that drew me to him. And then the wrestling matches that he had, there's like an extended period of time where it's like him and I think it was like X-Pac going back
Yeah.
and forth for the European Championship, I believe.
Yeah.
Um, and like those matches were incredible, and it was something where you didn't get to see that from them a lot of the time. Like especially I don't want to say like the undercard people or the mid card, but sometimes they just didn't let them work. Like they
Yeah.
wouldn't let them go past 5 minutes. And getting to see such a series of these great matches with D'Lo and with it when they had the European title going around, the Intercontinental Championship going around, you finally got like these matches that you really expected to have for a championship.
Absolutely. And just the way he carried himself, like the head shaking on his way out
Mm,
to the ring.
yes.
And even before like his leg drops, like he would like do like the shake head. Like you were just kind of like, what are you doing? But it was a hook, like no matter like what you thought about like those seemingly weird movements, like it captivated you, like it drew your attention to him. And he was just a phenomenal worker in the ring as well. He had the talent as well as the charisma. And, it's a shame that, his career kind of halted after the Draws incident in the year
Hmm.
2000 or late
Yeah.
99. And it's hard to say, what happened there exactly. Not in terms of the accident, because both sides, both Draws and D'Lo, were both like, to this day, it was nobody's fault. It was just like this freak thing. Like,
Right.
there's just no way to tell, and there was no way to prevent it as it was happening. But just what happened with D'Lo afterwards, because I don't know if it was kind of like a hesitancy to perform the way he was performing before. Like he no longer did that running power bomb after the incident. But like I imagine that there has to be like some type of hesitancy
Hmm.
the next time you work. And like, do you ever really get over something like that? I'm not quite sure.
Yeah, it's definitely something. I know that I think it was Edge's first match where he did some move. I don't remember who he was wrestling at the time, and he broke the person's neck. And like, luckily, like it wasn't a serious like paralyzing incident.
Yeah.
But I remember him talking about it and being like, here he is finally getting his opportunity on the big stage essentially and getting his first match, and like he injures somebody, and it's obviously like not what you ever want to do, but it just happened. And
Yeah.
it's definitely something where you see it especially nowadays, and there's a number of wrestlers where they always get brought up of this person keeps injuring the other person, like other people that they wrestle, or
Yeah.
they're injury prone. And there's definitely like that hesitancy on the part of the WWE of putting them back in the ring. And like one of them is Samoa Joe, who has been doing commentary apparently,
Yeah.
but he keeps getting injured. Apparently he's been injured for like a number of years where he's been like he wrestles and then has an injury. He wrestles and then there's an injury. And so like he does the rehab, and then he's been on commentary or like doing interviewing or whatnot. But
In
I
the
don't.
Taz position.
Yeah. And then who's the other person? Oh, Nia Jax is the one where I know that she keeps injuring other people,
Yeah.
and people are like, why are you still letting her wrestle at this point?
Yeah, it's like this. I would love to be able to fly on the wall on like some of these conversations, because like all we know is what we know and what's been reported, and like that's all, secondhand information.
Mm-hmm.
We
And
can review the tapes from the angles that we view the tapes, but like also like we are not privy to, other angles or the communications between the wrestlers to know, like, is it truly just, bad luck with Nia Jax being in, in the ring with these people, or is she like legit dangerous? And it's just like it's really weird to watch, because like you would have like it's weird. It's hard to know with some of this stuff.
And then you had mentioned Ivory, and I was thinking about like that time period. And obviously, like there are those wrestlers like Luna, Ivory, Jacqueline, and then to some extent at that time period, Trish and Lita, who and I guess I'll lump in Molly Holly also because I can't forget her. But like
Right.
you have all of them, but they're not doing like the what essentially is the extent of what they could be doing, because at that time they weren't really letting them really work, so to speak, like they are nowadays. And while a lot of them set the stage for the eventual like women's division, it's definitely a bummer not to be able to see them like be able to just go out there for the 10, 15, 20 minutes that some of the women now are being given to like really showcase what they could do, because a lot of them had been in the business for years before getting to the WWE and
Yeah.
doing, independence and smaller like areas and smaller groups and stuff. And it's like, I just wish we could have let them like see what they could have done.
Yeah, I mean, Ivory was trained by Mondo Guerrero for the actual Glow, that the Netflix Glow is based on. She was Tina Ferrari back then.
Hmm.
And then went years without wrestling. She was like a saleswoman for Revlon when she got a call to be one of Godfather's hoes on a random Monday night. And she impressed them enough that evening because they needed someone, one of the girls, to be able to take a bump in the ring.
Hmm.
And she was trying to do that. And she was like, all right, for this amount of money, yeah, I'll fly in, fly out, no problem. She was impressive enough that they asked her back, and then she became the valet for D'Lo Brown and Mark Henry in '99. And yet, like the amount of storytelling that she could get done within like those 2-3 minute matches were just really incredible, like extremely fast paced. And she was also the oldest on the roster at the time as far as the women.
Hmm.
If you go back and watch the Evolution pay-per-view from 2 years ago, the all-female WWE
Yeah,
pay-per-view
I think it was 2 years
2 years
ago.
ago, and you look at that battle royal where she comes back, she came back for, she's older than Alundra Blaze.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, by like a good like 2 years. And she made it to like the last 5, I think. Like, and she's still able to go, and is able to go like even more than Alundra is. So it's like really interesting, like to watch, like watch and like listen to her, because she's done a bunch of like shoot interviews, and you go back and watch some of the matches that she would have with Jacqueline, because in the year 2000, Trish and Lita both debuted, and they were essentially the managers for TNA and the Hardys respectively.
Hmm.
So they had a bit more screen time there, and they had like kind of like this build. Trish really wasn't like thought of as much of a wrestler at that point. She would later prove, I think, almost everybody wrong
Yep.
about her talents. But yeah, I mean, you had Trish and Lita in these mixed tag matches and some singles stuff between the two of them because of their attachment to two established tag teams. But you have Ivory and Jackie in the early 2000s, just kind of like floundering in like an almost non-existent women's division with no build-up. And they're trying to, within their entrances, trying to establish to the crowd who's the face, who's the heel of this match. And, you know, I think a lot of blame was put on them for like not getting the crowd's reaction, but like there was no build to their matches. Like there was no time to really establish a character. And Jacqueline, while an incredible wrestler, not so great on the mic anytime that she was on the mic. You know, she had like that limitation. So I think even if there was a chance to build to something, like it couldn't be done over the mic. So like the matches that they were able to craft, and you could see most of the time, like the crowd starting to react like as the match was ending. Like they were hooking people in, but like there just wasn't enough established by the company or written into their story for people to be invested into the stuff that they were doing.
Yeah, it's something where, and you know, if you're not going in with the background of, well, why are these two wrestling besides it's just a wrestling match, which is fine, and that works. And in the case of wrestling, as long as you give them enough time to start telling a story.
Yeah.
But you know, you need to give them that time for them to work and get the audience like hooked. And if they're not really being used properly, they're like, if you're just bringing them out after like 2 or 3 weeks of them not being on the screen at all or doing anything, you're starting from back to basics.
And arguably my favorite match, and I get a lot of shit for this. Arguably my favorite match is like 2002 Survivor Series, the 6-pack challenge for the women's title. And it's Ivory, Lita, Trish, Jacqueline, Molly Holly, and the introduction of Jazz from ECW. And I love that match, and it's one of my favorites because they were given such a short amount of time, even on a pay-per-view, to tell a story, and they still managed to get every single one of their spots in.
Mm-hmm.
And it's almost a perfect match, except for the very end. I still, to this day, argue that Trish should not have gone over in that match. I think it should have been Jazz because there's no other reason, as far as story, to keep Jazz on. Like, this is her first match. And if she doesn't win the championship, she was on the losing, you know, oh gosh, we don't have enough time to get into the invasion angle for this to make sense. But Jazz should have gone over because for story purposes, it made the most sense.
Right.
Because she had to have some value to be kept around for that particular story.
Absolutely. Now, you know, you talked about your favorite match. For that, do you have like a match that you look back on, or a storyline that you look back on and you're like, you know what, for when I watched it, like this was the moment, or this was perfection for me in the Attitude Era?
I mean, I started watching it a great year. SummerSlam 2000, the first ever TLC match. With Edge and Christian, the Dudley Boys, and the Hardy Boys, table, ladders, chairs. That was just like, to this day, like I don't even know how to describe it. It was just so new. It was so different. And the stuff that they put their bodies through within like the span of like 20 minutes is incredible. Like the amount of times people were being thrown off ladders, put through tables, smacked in the head with chairs. They've done away with, you know, direct chair shots to the head because of CTE research. But at that time, like, it was an incredibly brutal but entertaining match.
It's incredible from like the viewpoint of like they hadn't really done a ladder match, like like I'm not saying that they haven't done a ladder match, but they like the most popular one was like Shawn Michaels Razor Ramon
Right.
like years before, and then you didn't really see it that much. It wasn't really some like a staple. And then for those three teams that are so completely different, like because you have like the Hardys who are probably like 250 275 combined weight soaking wet.
Yeah.
You got the Dudley Boys probably at like 500 or 600, probably about 500 ish, and
Yeah.
then Edge and Christian probably in the middle. But they have such different styles, and putting them all together, and then like I could have sworn that there was a interview of those three teams talking about it and how like who put the match together
You're
and
right.
how they picked their spots. But it's incredibly fascinating to watch
Poor Devon
because
Dudley.
oh my gosh, it's such like that match kicked off a series of matches between those three teams. Like it's just a mixer match at times of just like, okay, tonight's going to be Dudleys and Hardys, tomorrow's going to be Edge and Christian versus Hardys, and just going from there. But then like that kicked off a whole pay-per-view named after it.
Yeah.
It kicked off the number of like ladder matches for like Money in the Bank, essentially. Like it kicked off so many different like things with that are still in use to this day. Just I don't want to say not as brutal, because each one like I I mean I can fall down like a stair or like get off a stair wrong and hurt myself,
Yeah.
and for them to do what they did and still be able to walk away from that, I do not know.
Yeah, literally walk away. um yeah, and usually my example, like I have a lot of friends that are like, well, wrestling's fake, it's not real. And I'm like, when you like sure, you know, things are scripted, things are choreographed. When you fall off a 20-foot ladder, you're falling off a 20-foot ladder.
Right.
Try to make that not hurt, please. prove that to me.
I think now, like especially with how they did shows like Tough Enough or a lot of these background shows that they've started to incorporate, I think like that concept isn't entirely going away, but it's definitely something that's faded away, because even I remember watching them, like watching the new people like run the ropes, and then after a while you see like their back just like having the red marks across them from those ropes, because they're not ropes, they're like these cables, and like you just have to build up like that I don't know, like build up something so that way it's not really showing. But dang, if you know, I can't imagine being hit by a chair. I can't imagine falling from a ladder, going through a table, regardless of if those tables are like meant to go through or not. You still have like those metal things underneath them too. And it's just like, oh, I cringe every time.
Yeah. Some of the spots like back in the day, just you like I mean, obviously they're getting paid enough. But I don't know if someone could pay me enough to do half of the stuff they did in just that one 20-minute match. But like, as you said, like this was really began a series of matches between those three teams. And, you know, that was such a highlight and such a thing that people talked about for so long that when they did it again, you know, you have to keep raising the stakes almost.
Yep.
And, you know, your body takes a toll. I think there are 6 of them. I think only half of them are still wrestling, both the Hardys and Edge, and everybody else is retired, right?
I think that's the case. I know that the Dudleys had a school down here in Florida for a time. I'm not sure if the school's still open. And then Bubba was wrestling, at least I know he was wrestling back in Impact for a while, but I don't think he's doing anything now, at least not on my radar anyway.
Yeah, and Devon's a producer for the WWE.
Mm-hmm.
And Christian does on-air stuff with them. I don't know if the Christian and Ed show is still a thing on the network.
I don't think so. I don't think that they picked that up for another go around.
Oh, okay. But yeah, he still has, his hand in the proverbial pot, as it were.
Yep. Now, did you have a favorite champion, just out of curiosity?
Favorite champion?
Yes.
Whew. Triple H. Again, he was such a great heel champion. So he had this way of just talking himself up as the baddest and the toughest guy in the business. And then he would hide behind his lackeys any chance that he got. And it's just you would believe him so much. It's yeah, I don't need anybody's help and I can do this and that. And, I am the game and I am that damn good. And then, midway through the match, somebody would come out and interfere, or he would sneak a weapon in. It's just oh my gosh. You're a bad, bad man. But I loved him. He was great.
Absolutely. Now, I guess my last question for wrestling is, do you still watch it? Is it something that you still make time for today?
I make time for the pay-per-views more so today. I'm a loyal WWE Network subscriber, only $9.99. And I don't find myself watching Raw, really. I was more of a SmackDown guy anyway, especially when they did the first brand split. That's kind of where my allegiance kind of moved. So I'll watch SmackDown occasionally. The only weekly program that I watch is AEW. But I watch WWE pay-per-views every month, and I'll catch, a few SmackDowns here and there. But I don't know. I don't really care as much about the product today, just based on the way that I don't know the wrestlers in the way that we used to be able to know wrestlers.
Mm-hmm.
You would know Test and Crash Holly in the same way that you would know, The Rock and Stone Cold and Triple H. You knew everybody's name and face for the most part. Today, there's just not that same pull. There are some incredible matches happening, certainly. But yeah, I'm not a fan of the way that the talent is being displayed, or lack of talent being displayed.
I can agree with you. I follow it online. I read the stuff that people write about it. I read what happened in This Week in Raw or This Week in SmackDown. And there's so many people that I'm not in the know about because, again, didn't watch NXT to see them come up, or I'm not familiar with what's going on outside of the scope of WWE Prime. And it's just that
Yeah.
I'd like to, but I also read the reviews of the matches aren't as good at times, or
yeah, I do my weekly Bleacher Report and What Culture roundups to kind of see what I miss. And sometimes it's as you said, oh, didn't really miss much this week, so.
So on top of wrestling, before we wrap up, there is another fandom that you're into, which I admitted to you before we started recording. I'd never even heard of it. Don't know what it is. But not only are you into it, but you're part of a podcast about it.
Yeah.
And that is, and I'm going to butcher the name because it's been so long since I practiced it. Poirot.
You're really close.
I could be Southern and be Poirot.
The fandom of Monsieur Hercule Poirot, the great Belgian detective that was introduced to us by the queen of mystery herself, Agatha Christie. So my podcast, Amateur Detective Club, we cover mostly Poirot, that we have kind of ventured out to cover some occasionally different things. We did Knives Out when that came to theaters, and Detective Pikachu. We stay in the murder mystery or mystery realm. But we do mostly focus on the Agatha Christie work surrounding Hercule Poirot, the world's greatest detective, mostly known for Murder on the Orient Express, the book And Then There Were None, Death on the Nile, which is going to come out in September, I think, with Kenneth Branagh and Lupita Nyong'o, if I'm not mistaken. Actually, I think I am mistaken about Lupita, but definitely Kenneth Branagh.
Now, how did you get into that? Because I'm pretty sure like it's an old fandom, right? Like it's
Oh yeah,
been
these
around
books
for a
are like written
while.
in the 40s.
Yeah.
Yeah. I was approached. The podcast had existed previously without me. Hard to believe that anyone could start something without me. But my two friends had approached me to replace their other co-host, and I had definitely watched a few iterations of Murder on the Orient Express, and I'd seen a couple of episodes of Agatha Christie's Poirot, the television program on BBC, as a kid because it used to come on A&E, that channel. Does that channel even exist anymore? Probably.
I think it does, and that's probably where I've heard the name before.
Yeah, they used to show a whole lot of like murder mystery reruns. Like it was like Agatha Christie's Poirot and like Murder She Wrote and Columbo, like in like this block on a weekday afternoon. That's how I kind of came to know about Poirot, and I hadn't like read or seen anything in years. And when they approached me, I was like, absolutely, I'd love to do this because I wanted to get back into reading more things. One, and then also learn more about this character who has almost like this Shakespearean type of following and level of popularity. Like the series was written way back when, yet this character still holds up and people are still drawn to this character. And that's why there are like so many series and movies still being made based off of these works by Agatha Christie.
For people like me who have either heard the name or have no idea what we might be getting ourselves into, like what might be we getting ourselves into if we like get into either the books or watching it on TV or through video of some sort.
Oh, that is a good question and so hard to answer. He's this oh gosh, it's this Belgian detective that everyone keeps confusing as French, even in the books, who lives in England and solves these crimes using, the little gray cells of the mind. Like he believes like everything can be, deduced through like proper thinking and like taking your time. And he's very methodical. He's all about order and method in his approach to solving crimes. And these crimes take him all over the world sometimes, and all over England, certainly, as well. And it is like some of the books and parts of the show are really funny at times, which I think a lot of people don't expect. But it was also definitely written in a very specific time. So, you have to acknowledge that as well. Like there's a lot of xenophobic and racist comments throughout the book. I mean, the original title of And Then There Were None was something very, very different. And I definitely won't say that on air. You can look it up for yourselves. But it's just interesting, I'm trying to think of like a good example of like 30 Rock does an episode at one point where it's kind of Murder on the Orient Express. Yeah, it's just I think a lot of people who read the books or watch the series or watch the movies based on the Hercule Poirot novels will find that you probably do know these stories. You just didn't know that this was the base for the stories that you've heard before. So there is a lot of familiarity, even if you haven't read like a proper Agatha Christie novel.
Okay. I like something like that where it's such an influence that these stories get retold, and you get familiar with the story and you're like, oh, I love the story, and then you go back to something like reading an Agatha Christie book, and you're like, hey, wait, that I know that because it was in this, and then you realize that came like after and it was influenced directly, and you're like, oh, how about that?
Yeah, exactly.
Do you have any recommendations on as far as like watching it? Like what should I watch? Like if I wanted to be this weekend, make my kids watch something.
Oh boy.
what what would you is there a particular movie or particular show where I should be like, okay, here, watch this?
Of Poirot, I would definitely say like the old school Murder Orient Express movie with Albert Finney. And if that isn't available to, I'm not sure if you have BritBox, but that is like a channel that you can get like on Amazon or through your Amazon Prime.
Mhm.
And that's how we typically watch Poirot ourselves to cover it for the series. And their Murder on the Orient Express episode actually has Jessica Chastain in it.
Okay. I will have to check it out. I did look up. I'm looking up Death on the Nile, and it's Letitia Wright and
Letitia Wright.
Gal Gadot, Letitia Wright, Brana.
I knew it was
And
somebody from Black Panther that wasn't Chadwick Boseman.
yes, it looks like it's got a lot of people. I know it looks like it's supposed to come out October of this year, but given the state of affairs and movies being pushed back to who knows when.
No, they'll
um,
put it on demand, I'm sure.
I was talking to somebody yesterday, and it was like we were talking about when movies would eventually come out, and like Mulan's been delayed indefinitely. The Avatar sequels are pushed back to who knows when.
Yeah, Tenet as
Like
well.
Tenet pushed back, and I know that like especially with Disney, because I love Disney and their movies, and I live in Orlando, and I would love to go to Disney if it wasn't such a crazy time right now. But they put Hamilton on Disney Plus, but they can't do that. Like they can't do that with all their movies because their return is literally $6.99
Right.
for like the month, and then the people will cancel. And I don't know if they'd want to just go the route of like, oh, let's put it on Amazon or something of that nature, or just somehow put it on a digital streaming service that's not Amazon or Vudu or one of those services, and try to make something where you can charge for it. Because I mean, I'll pay $20 to watch it in my house because there's 5 of us and we'll probably watch stuff, but I
Yeah.
don't know.
It's interesting because I don't know like what the returns were on movies like The High Note and King of Staten Island and the like that just forewent a theatrical opening and just like, yep, it's on video on demand right now, $20, have at it.
Yep. Like I know the Trolls movie did extremely well, but that was like the first one that hit, and with all the kids that were home, which I mean, my kids have been home since March. They've gone out probably. We've gone out in the van driving around, but going out to like a public area has been once since March.
Yeah, and like Disney Plus launched with Onward, right? Like that was the hook.
They did well. Disney Plus didn't launch with Onward. They put Onward available on Amazon first, and then after a couple of weeks they did
Oh,
put it on Disney Plus.
okay.
For like a couple of weeks it was not there, but then it did get to Disney Plus, and we were like, hooray, it's on Disney Plus, and we didn't pay the $20 for it. I mean, we would have paid the $20 for it, but we also love to just watch free stuff too that we're already paying for.
No, absolutely. And this economy, you better believe it.
So the podcast that you're part of, which is the Amateur Detective Club, you cover Poirot, but you also cover, like, as you said, like anything like in that vein of
Knives Out, Clue. We went back and did the movie Clue. We just finished a bit ago going through the #1 Ladies Detective Agency, which was a one-series HBO series that you can still find on one of the, or probably all of the 8 HBO apps that are out there these days. And yeah, like we'll do bits and things. And on our Patreon exclusively, we cover Murder, She Wrote with Angela Lansbury.
Oh gosh, that is something right there. Like I look fondly on that show because I grew up watching it. And it's so good.
Is it?
Okay, it's so good from like 8-year-old me watching it back in the day. I haven't watched it recently.
No, it's good, but it's also like super frustrating. Like, how do you jump the shark in your first season? Like, there's a whole thing about like this murder death car, and there's also an episode around like where they think the dog shot someone. And it's just like, what is happening?
I just know there are shows that my wife will not let me watch at this point. Like I tried to watch Murder, She Wrote. She said no. I tried to get her to be like, okay, you know what? Let's watch Golden Girls. No.
Really?
And I'm like, come on, like,
You're
and then
in Florida.
I know, and like she won't let me have the kids watch Labyrinth. And I'm like, come on, it's David Bowie, and she's like, I hate David Bowie.
What?
I know. It's a crazy time.
Was she like? Did she concede on Dark Crystal?
Yes. Oh well. Okay. We watched the movie Dark Crystal. Then us as a family, we tried to watch the Dark Crystal series on Netflix, and we watched the first episode. All my kids and my wife said it's boring. So I watched the Dark Crystal series by myself and loved it and was hooked. And I am so excited to see what they do if they bring it back for another season.
Yeah, I still have to make it through the rest of the season. I think I have like 3 or 4 more episodes to watch.
It is an incredible series. It's I guess the one thing I have to say is not only does it have a great story, but their puppeteering is amazing. Like what they are able to do now with what they weren't able to do back like during the movie time is just incredible. Like they reduce the amount of people having to do a puppet. You have more puppets. You get like these beautiful backgrounds that they're working off of. I mean, it is wonderful to watch.
That's awesome.
All right. For people that have made it through our Attitude Era discussion and our detective mini section of this podcast, where can people find you or the Amateur Detectives Club out there on the internet?
Real quick, if I may.
Of course.
If I leave you with anything about wrestling, it is that wrestling is for me the highest form of physical theater that you will find. And that should be your way of viewing wrestling if you choose to view professional wrestling. It is heightened theater in the most physical form that is out there in existence. And to answer your question about where to find me, I can be found on Twitter and Instagram at It's Tyler Riley, all one word. And the Amateur Detective Club is on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at ADC Pod.
Awesome. I will have the links to everything in the show notes on the Facebook page and the website. So that way, if you are listening and would like to go check out Tyler or check out the podcast, you can do so by just a click of the button. And Tyler, I want to say thank you so much for your time today and coming on and talking about the fandoms that you're super into.
Thank you so much for having me. I mean, I could literally talk about wrestling for all day, but even in quarantine, who has the time?
Not everybody.
Thank you for listening to Tales from the Fandom. Subscribe to us on iTunes or your podcast app of choice. Follow us on Facebook at www.facebook.com/Tales from the Fandom to see photos, links, leave feedback, and check out upcoming guests. If you'd like to be a guest, email David at talesfromthefandom@gmail.com.